Welcome to the Agile Career Podcast, where we will take you on the journey from employed for life to employable for life. We'll give you the tips, insights, and strategies to help you build the transferable skills that you'll need. So let's get started. Please welcome your host, Günther Richter.
Hello listeners, and welcome to episode 22 of the Agile Career Podcast. Now, I know I posted on social media that there wasn't going to be an episode this week because I'd been away on holiday, but what I decided to do was do a bit of a different episode. I'll probably say that at the start of every episode, but this one I'm going to do a little bit of a behind the scenes episode, and that's really because quite a few people have been asking me what it takes to start the podcast or what it takes to run the podcast. So what I thought I'd do was just cover off a few of those things, just kind of lay out some of the basics, some of the things that I did to get the show up and running, and hopefully that'll help you. So I guess it's probably poignant as well to do that because we're into the 20s, so the podcast has been running for almost half a year, and that seems to have gone so much quicker than I thought. So probably a good break to sit and reflect as well and think about some of the steps that I had to go through to get the podcast started. So by no means is this a full guide. I do plan to write up a more detailed guide in terms of starting your own podcast and talking about some of the more technical aspects of it, and not necessarily only the technical ones, but there are a few bits and bobs involved, and also the non-technical ones. But for this show, I'm going to keep it short and just talk about the key points and the steps that I went through. And the first biggest one was really choosing a podcast platform. And by platform, I don't mean Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify. And I guess until the point of starting the podcast, I didn't really know much about how it all worked. I thought you would record the podcast as one does and upload it to all of the things like Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. But it's a little easier than that. You choose a podcast host like you would choose a website host. You create all your content on that platform, and then it automatically gets disseminated to the platforms you choose. Now, that is really beneficial because it means you really only have to do something once. If you make changes to the show, it updates everywhere. What it does mean, though, is that there's a cost involved, usually because you have to pay a monthly subscription to the platforms. But there are some alternatives in terms of free versions and those sorts of things. So I'll talk through those a little bit. Now, what I did was I looked around. I talked to some other people that have been podcasting to try and understand what platforms they used, and I got it down to a short list of 3. The first one was Soundcloud, the second one was Buzzsprout, and the third one was Audioboom. Looking through those, I kind of narrowed it down again to Buzzsprout and Audioboom, and I did eventually choose Buzzsprout. What I did was I also took a paid subscription to Audioboom to compare the two, and thought really that Buzzsprout did all that I needed it to do, and was more feature-rich than Audioboom. And I think, there were a few more tools that Buzzsprout has, like creating sound bites. The user interface was a little bit better, although that doesn't mean much to the listeners, I suppose, because it's usually the podcast producer that's using the interface. But I did find Buzzsprout a little more feature-rich than Audioboom. Audioboom is probably better. I wouldn't say value for money, but it is less expensive. So Buzzsprout, for example, has a free version. It's limited to 2 hours of upload per month, and it'll only keep your shows on for 90 days. So good if you want to test it out. You've got no money to spend. You can give it a go. You can convert the plan at any time, and then paid plans start from $12 per month. The one I'm on is the $12 per month plan, and then also sometimes I run over the limit of uploads and have to pay an extra $4 per month. So my cost varies between $12 and $16 a month for the platform. Now, what I've done as part of the show, and I'll include a link below, I've got a link to Buzzsprout, which can get you going. It is an affiliate offer, so if you do follow the link and decide to sign up for a paid plan, I'll receive a small commission at no additional cost to yourself. And obviously that commission will go towards the cost of running this podcast. And I will post a link below. And it is quite a good deal. So in addition to what you get on the paid plan, Once you sign up for the paid plan, you'll also receive a $20 Amazon gift card, and that helps support our show. And yeah, I mean, as I said, I've found Buzzsprout to be probably the best platform out there. It is used for this podcast. Other than that, there's some really good guides on Buzzsprout. There's a blog which features a lot of support. So I've learned a lot in terms of marketing the podcast from there, some of the technical aspects. So that's been really useful. It also helps you easily list your show on all the major podcast platforms. As I've said before, things like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, Stitcher, loads of those. It gives you a great looking podcast website, and what you can do is also you can provide your own domain name, so you can customize it. What it would do would be like Buzzsprout / and then the name of your podcast or something like that. I've registered my own domain name, which then links to that, so you've got that option as well. There's some really great embedded players that Buzzsprout has, so you can drop those into your blog or your personal website. And that is quite useful. They look quite good. They're very, very interactive and attractive, and it also comes with some good analytics, so you can understand, where your downloads are happening across the world, the amount of downloads you have per episode. So yeah, some good analytics behind that. So yeah, that is really Buzzsprout. As I say, Audioboom, not as sexy, not as feature rich. I think the difference with Audioboom is it's a little less expensive. It comes in at around $10 per month. There is no free version, unfortunately, so that's why I signed up for a paid version, just to evaluate it. It does have the benefit over Buzzsprout that if you are running multiple podcasts, you can host those all under your same monthly plan. What you would need to do with Buzzsprout to launch another podcast is take out another subscription. So it would be more expensive than in that sense. So that's probably the key benefit that Audioboom has going for it. Again, if you're getting started with podcasting, you're probably only going to be doing one podcast, as I am, but just something to bear in mind. Also, the platforms, there is quite a lot of portability between them. So it's usually a matter of taking your feed for your podcast that you provide to the platforms like Apple and Google, providing that to your new podcast host, and it migrates all of your content across. So you can change. There's no massive hurdle or no massive barrier to stop you from changing hosts. So yeah, you're not in it for life. So that's the podcasting platform. The next bit was choosing some equipment. So I'd gone through a number of microphones. Obviously, the internal microphone on my computer. Run everything on an Apple iMac. I also had a small Samsung Go mic, which is a USB mic, pretty decent. But I wanted something that would up the quality a little bit. Shopped around, and there's some really expensive mics out there. Some really good value for money mics. But what I settled on was a Marantz. What I liked about the Marantz was it came with everything you really need to get started. So it comes with the condenser microphone, it comes with the USB cable you need, and it comes with the boom arm and all the attachments. It was a really good deal. I bought it on Amazon. It was a real hassle to get hold of, and because I'd started the podcast around about the start of lockdown, and it seemed like everyone was doing that sort of thing. So it was really difficult to get hold of stock, but it looks like those are all available now. I paid £49, I think, for the microphone, for the whole set. And as I say, that's the microphone, the cable, the attachments, and the boom arm. The price is down to £45 now. This is the mic I'm using currently. The quality is fantastic. It's really good value for money. I will post a link to the Amazon products as well in the show notes. I think the only drawback of this is the boom arm is not as long as I thought it might be. So what you can't do is mount the boom arm on your desk. It comes with like a G-clamp. You can't mount it on your desk behind your computer and have it extend all the way through. You've got to mount it either to the left or to the right of you, unless you're sitting on the corner of your desk. But again, it's no hassle. The boom arm swings. So when I'm recording, I swing it around to be in front of me. When I'm not using it, I just swing it aside and it doesn't get in the way at all. So the last bit then you need is the software that you're going to use to record the podcast. Now, if you're going to be doing interviews, you'll need some other software. I use either Skype or Zoom, and I'll talk about those bits in a little bit. But the main amount of work is to master or to edit or produce the podcast. And for that, I use GarageBand, which comes as part of the Apple ecosystem. It's a great product. It's really easy to use. The results are fantastic. If you're on a Windows platform, unfortunately, you don't have that option. But there is a free bit of software called Audacity. Now, I haven't really used it. I've played around with it a bit, and it looks okay. It comes highly recommended by podcasters. It's available on Mac as well, so you don't have to use GarageBand. You can use either of the two. I use GarageBand, as I say, to do all the production, and that works really well for me. So yeah, as I said, that's if you just recording the podcast straight up, which I'm doing right now. When I do interviews, I do those either via Zoom or Skype. I tend to find that Skype has a slightly better sound quality, but not everybody has a Skype account or is signed up for it. Zoom seems to have become the new norm. So a lot of the interviews I do via Zoom. One of the benefits that Zoom provides is that it records a video file and an audio file. So you don't really need to do any work about splitting those out. If you are using Skype, it'll record a combined file. It's an MP4 file. And what you need to do is you need to split that out before you play around or before you edit the podcast for sound only. So a little bit of an extra step if you're using Skype, but not a train smash. Both of those work really well for doing interviews. And use either one. It's usually based on the guest's preferences. Other things like Google Hangouts, I don't think you can record. So I've not tried that. But as I say, between Zoom and Skype, most of your guests, if you are having guests on your podcasts, will have either one of those platforms available. So that's really choosing your setup. Once you've got all of that, you can get going. There's so many bits to think about in terms of obviously what your topic's going to be in the podcast, and I think that's something that I'll cover off in a blog post or a guide or some online lessons. But in terms of what I go through on a weekly basis then to produce the podcast is obviously identifying interesting guests to get on and either reaching out to them and having a chat if I don't know them already. If I know them, it's a little bit easier because, you can just kind of have a chat about coming on the podcast. So once I've got that, I need to do a bit of preparation, and that's really just kind of structuring the show. Now, obviously, the theme of the Agile Career podcast is exactly that. It's around careers. It's about building transferable skills. So that's the overriding topic. And what I try to do is try and get a theme for each of those episodes. Sometimes it's easy enough to identify the theme beforehand and discuss that with the interviewee. Other times, where, for example, someone has a really broad set of experience, the sort of theme emerges when you're talking through the interview. And what I typically do is provide some guidance to the guests beforehand to say, well, these are the sorts of questions I'll ask. But, not the exact questions, although, if you do listen to an episode or two before, you kind of realize what I'll be asking. The one thing I don't want the podcast to be is scripted. I like it to be a conversation, with both parties participating and informal. So I do spend a bit of time, though, preparing for each of those and thinking about the theme for the show for that particular episode and, some of the questions we're going to cover off. The next bit then is really producing it. I've been lucky so far that I haven't needed to do too many edits. Sometimes you'll have some bad quality in a recording and you need to take that out because you just can't hear what's going on. Sometimes I'll need to re-record the intro or the outro, sort of depending on what we've decided on the theme of the podcast. So there is that. As I say, I use GarageBand. It's pretty easy. It does take a bit of time. So once you've done that, you need to then basically create the show in your platform. Buzzsprout is pretty easy. You just upload the MP3 file that you've created out of GarageBand. You need to write up your show notes. The show notes do take a bit of time as well. What I like to do is when I'm going through the podcast interview is to make notes as we go. That helps me obviously form the questions and keep track of where we are, draw out some of the highlights, and then obviously write up the show notes afterwards. I also do tend to listen through to the recording as well, and if there's anything I've missed during the show, is to pull out those highlights as well. Once that's done, then the show goes live, and the next bit of effort is really the social media around the show and promoting the show. For that, I tend to use Canva to create the graphics, and I use a product called Buffer to schedule all the social media posts. And those social media posts go out on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Instagram as well, although I am finding that the Buffer platform doesn't work that great with Instagram, and some of the graphics don't render that well on Instagram. So I think really LinkedIn has been the main platform, and Facebook second for promoting that. Now, the social media does take a bit of time. It's probably something that you don't always think about because you do need to market the podcast. It's not that people will just come and listen to it. You do need to get it out there. So, don't underestimate the amount of time that you need to spend doing the social media aspect. So, then the next question I often have is how long does it take? And I've done a rough calculation. It kind of varies between shows. But I would say it takes probably in the region of around 6 hours per week to produce 1 hour of content. So, yeah, I mean, I've got one show coming out a week normally. So that's an investment of around 6 hours. What that doesn't factor in is all of the time it takes to schedule guests, correspond with guests or prospective guests. And get those things lined up. So, you can probably add on another hour or so per week to do that. And that's what it takes to produce the podcast. So I've obviously learned a lot of stuff over the last 20 or so episodes. And what I will be doing is writing those up in a number of either video guided tours or blog posts. If you want to hear more about what that might look like, or you're keen for a particular format, please get in touch and let me know what would help you get your podcasting going. And many people are seeing, I guess, podcasting as being almost the new blogging. Blogging is still very much very popular, very much out there. It's just, I think the opportunities with podcasting are probably greater because the space is a lot less crowded than the blog space. So certainly something to pursue. So in summary then, what are the software components that I'm using for the podcast? I am using Buzzsprout to host the podcast, and I have included a link in the show notes which will get you signed up and get you a $20 Amazon gift card if you take a paid plan. Please feel free to take advantage of that offer. There was the microphone you'll need. I've recommended the Marantz Pod Pack 1. Again, really good value for money, and the link is in the show notes. Then the other software to produce the podcast, I've used GarageBand. You can also use something like Audacity, and I'm pretty sure some of the built-in Windows tools might also be suitable for producing the podcast. I think all the other bits are really kind of optional extras. The other bits of software that I use, as I said, are Canva to produce the graphics and promotional materials for the podcast. There is a free version of Canva available. I've taken the paid one. There's some great functionality in it. There's loads of stock photography. It's got a really great tool for removing backgrounds. So when you look at the promotional materials for each episode, you can see When I get the headshots from the interviewees, I remove the background. That's all automated. A lot easier than using something like Photoshop or GIMP. And then Buffer I use for all of the social media posts and scheduling. Again, you don't need to do that. You can do it manually. I just prefer to do it in an automated fashion and schedule things up front. And that's really it to the podcast. So hopefully this has showed you a little bit behind the scenes in terms of what it takes to produce the podcast. Please, if you have any questions or want to know anything more about behind the scenes, please reach out and get a hold of me. You can do that by contacting me at info@agilecareerpodcast.com, or you can also visit my website, which is www.gunterrichter.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again for listening. Apologies that this hasn't been one of the normal episodes. Again, things have been a bit difficult with, holidays and being on the move. But hopefully this is a bit of a placeholder and does show you a little bit behind the scenes. And thanks again for listening. I really appreciate your time and the input and the feedback that I get about the show. Please remember to subscribe on your favorite platforms. And if you do enjoy the show, or even if you don't, please leave a review on any of the platforms that do allow you to leave a review. I look forward to talking to you again in the next episode. In the meantime, bye-bye and take care of yourselves.